What's going on, y'all? You know who I am, KM Best, and you know what time it is. It's hot takes time. Let's get started. Storm should never have gotten nerfed. War Machine should be changed to be activate, so players have to be tactical with him and when to play him. I think that this is an interesting take because I tend to agree that Storm is not who I would have nerfed from the Storm War Machine Legion combo. I would have nerfed War Machine, but I wouldn't have nerfed him like that. My attempt at nerfing War Machine would have been more aimed at hitting the splash ability of the combo, because when we saw Storm War Machine Legion show up in decks, it was as a piece of a mid-range deck. It wasn't like this was plan A, it was like you would play it in decks that would be okay with playing Storm, that would be okay with playing War Machine, that would be okay with playing Legion. So what I would try to attack is the splashability of that combo. Storm War Machine Legion doesn't necessarily have to be out of the game, but I don't want a deck like Move Midrange, which is good without it, or like the Scream deck, which is good without it, to be able to just play it and not pay a cost for it. Storm actually was the one of those cards that you had to pay the biggest cost for. That's a 3-2. It's not actually very good. I would have given, like, not necessarily a similar stat line to War Machine or Legion, but my instinct would be maybe take a point off Legion, maybe take 2 points off War Machine, and suddenly this deck is looking at those cards when they're not comboing off and just absolutely losing. This is not the kind of deck. Most of these mid-range decks need their cards to be, they don't have to be all the best at slot in terms of cost to power ratio, but they should be good enough that they aren't actively hurting your mid-range game plan of winning with points, right? And all you have to do to make Storm War Machine Legion less of a part of the metagame is to make it so the only decks that will reasonably do it have to be hyper invested in being Storm decks, in being War Machine decks, in being Legion decks, so that they, in order to pay off the investment they make in those cards, i.e. give those cards bad stat lines, so you need to build around them more than just splashing them, that is better for the game, in my opinion. The comparison I'd want to draw is to Mr. Negative. We all know that it's kind of okay for Mr. Negative to exist because you have to build around it, and because it's not that good when it doesn't happen because the stats on the card are so low. And I think that putting Storm War Machine Legion in a similar spot would be my goal if I were to attempt to nerf it. So I don't think they should have made War Machine activate. I think they should have made War Machine just weaker. I think it should have made it like a 4-4 or something. Can we please stop complaining about tech cards? So many players are currently breaking out the pitchforks for Cosmo. I'm not sure most players realize how unbalanced this game would be without cards like Cosmo. This is sort of a two-parter here. We're going to start with the second part. I'm not sure most players realize how unbalanced the game would be without tech cards. I agree tech cards are an important aspect of Marvel Snap. They're an important piece of the game. They keep other things in line. I think that's totally true and valid. The issue I think people have with tech cards is when tech cards become, instead of being a safety valve, this conversation came up a lot with Leech, instead of being a safety valve, they're a door slammer, right? And we've seen this with Cosmo, but I mean, we've also seen it with other tech cards, right? I think you could reasonably apply that definition of tech card to what Shang-Chi used to be in the Silky Smooth deck, which was entirely a deck constructed so that your opponent's Shang-Chi could not hit you, and you could Shang-Chi them. It's more of a door slammer than it is a tech card against preventing something bad from happening to you. It's really the opposite of that, right? And I think Cosmo is the door slammiest of those cards. One of the things I see a lot is, why wasn't Cosmo played a lot before? And there are two main reasons for that. Reason number one is actually Madam Web makes Cosmo a much more dangerous card, right? The combination of Madam Web, Cosmo, and Alioth mean that you could, in theory, just say your final turns on reveals just never happen if I get these reads right? The second is that if you're not playing it in a Madam Web deck, you are playing it in an Agent Venom deck. And Agent Venom, like, other than Elsa Bloodstone and Original Shuri, we have not had a card that is as good at doing points as Agent Venom is, right? And so you need certain scenarios for Cosmo to actually make sense. There are two real prerequisites for non-Madam Web Cosmo decks being good. The first is you have to have a ton of points. You have to be able to accept the fact that you're running a 3-3, and you have to have enough points to compensate for that, meaning you need some big engine card like Elsa, original Elsa, current Agent Venom, or previous Silver Surfer, right? You need your big engine card to make up for the fact that you're running a 3-3. So once you have that, you also really want to be a deck that uses that engine in a sort of proactive way to get ahead on the board and make your Cosmo functional. That is what this deck is doing very well. It's what Elsa did very well. And it's what Surfer actually didn't do as well, because Surfer was usually a final turn play. So you have really Elsa and Agent Venom and Shuri as the decks in which Cosmo was a actually you can't interact with me kind of card. And I think that's when people get really sick of Cosmo, is when it is basically just Alioth, or when it is basically just, Leech, right? Where what it's saying is actually like, all right, I realize that the points I'm bringing to bear are so strong that people will have to tech against me, so I'm going to turn off all the good tech. You can't Rogue my Iron Man. You can't Enchantress my Iron Man. You can't Shadow King my Athena. I have a Cosmo there. And while I agree with the general premise that it is probably underrated how good it is to have those cards in the game, and I wouldn't necessarily do anything to Cosmo, it is one of those cards that when other cards are able to subsidize it by being these massive point sticks, whether that be old Elsa, whether that be Shuri, whether that be the current Agent Venom, then Cosmo tends to become a problem. And I think it's not necessarily Cosmo's fault. He is being used as a symptom of that problem, the problem being, in my opinion, Agent Venom. The OTAs are missing as of late. Most changes now are either negligible or miss the mark. They should take more risk in shaking up the meta, as the OTAs are essentially the content patches in a game with one card a week releasing. I think this is close to about right. Like, I do wish they took more risks in OTAs, but at the same time, I don't think they think of them as the content patches necessarily. I think they think of the new cards as the content patches. And I don't think they're wrong either. You know how much every one of us complains about a new card coming out and suddenly it's anti-new card time, right? That is one of the flaws with Marvel Snap's release system from our perspective, from a player perspective. From their perspective, that's a huge shift in the metagame that they didn't have to do any balancing for, and they're probably just actually cool with that happening once a week, right? Like, when you look at how they are set up on their weeks, right? You have day one of the new card on Tuesday, where the new card is being teched against, right? You have day two of the new card, it's a hot location. Who the hell knows what happens there? Then you have day 3 and day 4. You have Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Those are like, it's not a coincidence that Thursday, Friday, Saturday tend to be my most consistent stream days, right? That's because that's when things start to even out and you can really get a sense of what's actually happening. Sunday, hot location again. Monday, another sort of blank day. Tuesday, another new card comes out, and then the whole cycle repeats again. And I think that they are very happy with a metagame that does, like, they want that, right? In terms of OTAs, I am not sure exactly what they should be doing with them. Obviously, my desire is that they buff older cards in order to sort of counteract what we would normally describe as power creep. I want them to be buffing cards in Series 3, and Series 2, and Series 1. They are very reticent to buff these cards in Series 1 and 2, especially. I think there's probably a ton of room to buff Series 3 cards that they just haven't really explored. And if I were in the building, what I'd be pushing towards would be not necessarily like a comprehensive reevaluation of what cards are supposed to be good in this game, but like, I would be asking someone like, hey, just go pick like 6 cards that aren't good. It's like, they have data on this, right? Like, this is what gets me about it. They have, at any given time, they could just pull a list of all the cards in Series 3 that have a win rate under 45% and be like, let's give a power to these cards. They could do that whenever they wanted. And I really wish they would do that a lot more than they currently do. The split button is a loot box, and it should be treated like one. Folks pay money to split for coveted cosmetics. Official odds should be posted from now on. I am of two minds about this because, I don't know, I gotta tell you, I mostly just split until I have an ink or a gold, and then I'm good. So I'm not the right person to talk about like paying money to split for a specific one. Like I realized I have a video from about a year ago of me splitting for a Thanos. That was literally, that wasn't like hunting for a god split or whatever. That was hunting for an ink or a gold. Like, that was like, so my aesthetic tastes are pretty base. Like I go for like the McDonald's of splits, right? It's just like, oh, it's good enough. It's there. It's very quick to get. I don't have to really freak out too much about it. So I can't speak towards like collection hunting. What I can say is that something instinctively in me, when I see these are a loot box, I think that is reductive in a way that is meant to favor the argument you're making. Which is to say, whenever people talk about splits, it feels like they ignore the collection track progress you accrue from getting those credits spent in that way. And I think that, like, I don't know. For all I know, maybe they did that intentionally to avoid splits being a loot box. I don't know. Like, by whatever legal definition. But when I think about what it was like to play this game, and what it was like to climb up the collection track, I didn't care about what my cards looked like. I cared about getting more cards. And so people that talk about splits in purely cosmetic terms, and not in terms of card acquisition, I feel like are selectively editing the thing they're talking about in order to make their position sound better. And I don't like that. The easiest way to get me to disagree with you on the internet is to make an argument that I generally agree with, but make it in a really bad and or seemingly dishonest way. I don't think that all the people doing this are doing this on purpose, but it does sort of strike me how much the conversation has been about splits and how, like, in every other context about this game, people talk about card acquisition. Except the context in which card acquisition is actually important to discuss, then suddenly it doesn't matter, and the only reason people are splitting is because they want these specific splits. I don't like that. It doesn't ring true to me. I think there's probably a reasonable way to discuss these issues, and for what it's worth, I don't know if they're legally required to post the split numbers, but I think that would be cool. That'd be a nice thing. But I guess I just feel as though the way the discussion around this has gone has been, I won't call it like intellectually dishonest per se, but it just feels like everyone is only talking about the aspect of this that lets them hammer their point the hardest. And I don't really enjoy that. The 1,000 token box should be changed to an ultimate variant. If no ultimate variants are available, then 1,000 tokens. Ultimate variants should be reduced to 2K tokens. So this I actually think is cool. I have been thinking about that fourth slot in the track or in the boxes a lot recently. Someone pointed out something that was actually crazy to me that I hadn't considered before, is that fourth slot has like hard locked Series 4 to Series 5 odds, right? And since there are so many fewer cards in Series 4, the system is set up such that when you finish Series 4, you become much more likely to start getting those 1,000 tokens because you keep rolling those Series 4 cards that you already have. Because if I'm not mistaken on this, it's 66% to get a Series 4 and 33% to get a Series 5. And there are like 20 Series 4 cards and like 60 Series 5s. So if it's hard locked to 66% Series 4, you are very likely to finish Series 4 and then start getting thousands and thousands of tokens, as opposed to any of the stuff you actually want. It's just going to be 1,000 tokens on repeat. I hadn't considered that. And also in the context of they keep making cards only into Series 5 and flexible series drops mean that bad cards are what goes into Series 4. I feel like that cache, that last cache, I haven't like, this was a real kind of moment for me because I didn't really think about it in those terms. But thinking about it in those terms, to me, it seems like the value of that spot has dropped dramatically. It has dropped dramatically from what it was originally set at because there are so many cards in Series 5, so few cards in Series 4, that Series 4 cards seem explicitly to be the ones that are relatively weaker. That is why they are dropping in flexible series drops. And when you finish Series 4, you are so much more likely to start getting 1,000 tokens. I actually have fully come around on this issue. I think they need to do something about that 4th spot in the cache. I was previously like, okay, I can't think of a good argument that isn't just I want more free stuff. But in the context of I actually think we have been losing value on this spot in the cache across the last year, I think it is reasonable at this point to say, I think you guys need to take another look at this. You guys need to take a look at how your system of creating only Series 5 cards, how your Series 4 cards don't seem to be as good. You need to look at that and say it is significantly impacting the value of the 4th spot in the cache, and I think that is a problem. And I'm not sure how much. Maybe we need a math person to do the math on this. Like, it would involve some approximations. I'm not a math guy. I have an econ degree that's like half math, half philosophy. I know calculus, but that's not this. And I also don't know calculus anymore. That was a decade ago. So we have a situation where the value of this cache, I think the 4th slot in the cache has decreased dramatically. And I actually think this is a good way for them to address it, because it addresses it in a way that does not impact card acquisition. And I think that they like the fact that you have to spend more money, right? They're a company. And I would suggest that addressing it in a way that doesn't impact card acquisition, but does let people feel good about that 4th slot in the cache, might be a win-win. If you got ultimate variants into that spot in the cache, I don't really see a problem with that. Maybe not ultimates, maybe just the spotlights, but you might be able to do something with this in a way that doesn't impact their bottom line in a meaningful way. Second Dinner hurt long-term prospects by releasing every beloved character in the beta, leaving them almost nothing of substance to sell casual fans in the passes, and token shop but D-list characters. This also leads to nerfing these loved heroes to keep the new D-list releases viable in the shop. I think this is actually true. I think this is one of the more astute observations that we've gotten in this system, and in this segment, I should say. And I think that they have recognized the problem here, and they are going out of their way to address it. And my source on that is, did y'all see they did Symbiote Spider-Man? Y'all see that? You see the Symbiote Spider-Man going on there? There are ways for them to sell what are effectively reskins of those popular characters, right? Like, they can do that. They are able to do that kind of thing, right? And I think they recognize, hey, wait, maybe this is a mistake. Maybe it is a problem that we did it like this, and we need now to go, like, find sort of alt versions of these characters to do. Here's the thing. I mean, like, I don't think they're dumb, and I think they like making money, and so I wouldn't be too worried about this, right? The Symbiote Spider-Man thing is the first example. I wouldn't be shocked if we see more of this, because it seems like such a very obvious thing to do, right? One of the things that I think is just really simple about a game like this is, if people want to give you money for something, you should let them give you money for that thing. And I think there are a lot of people who want to give you money for Spider-Man. I think there's a lot of people who want to give you money for Spider-Gwen, or for Miles, or for any of that stuff. Like, those are like the kind of cards where it's like, I feel like if they wanted to at any time, they could just be like, we're going to do another Spider-Verse season, and here's our justification of it. Because that's like that to me feels like an incredibly comics-coded thing to do, right? Like, oh, yeah, we have Spider-Man, but also we have Ultimate Spider-Man, right? We have Ultimate Spider-Man. Oh, you don't like how normal Spider-Man isn't married to Mary Jane anymore? Well, good news, Ultimate Spider-Man is married to Mary Jane, and they have a family. Oh, cool, it's totally different, right? And I think that's the kind of thing that, like, a game that has that sort of pedigree as a comics game, they can do that. And I wouldn't be shocked if they did. In fact, I won't even say I wouldn't be shocked if they did. I'm saying, like, they should do that. That is a thing they should be doing. They should be giving you good versions of characters that you like. Because otherwise, you end up with a metagame dominated by literally who? And you have all these, if you'll pardon the term, glup shittos running around the metagame, and you have no idea who they are. The Infinaut, I actually had no idea that was a real character to begin with, right? I read the Ultimates, and he showed up in there, and I was like doing the soy face, like, oh, it's the guy. I know that guy. As far as I know, that's like the only place he's ever showed up. Like, this is like a guy who showed up in 2 issues of a comic book ever, and he's just like the biggest guy in the game for reasons unknown. That is what you want to avoid. So I think this is an astute observation. It's a really good point, and I think they know it, and I wouldn't be worried about it going forward. I do not think this game can sustain growth if they do not fix the lack of agency in Series 3 slowdown. It could take months to build a deck you want to play. Selling Series 3 deck bundles is not the answer either. I'm going to be honest with you. I think if they sold those Series 3 deck bundles in the game, it might actually be the answer. Like, one of the things that I wanted the most when I was Series 3, I wanted Sarah, I wanted Death, I wanted to be able to play specific decks. That's what I wanted. That's the thing I cared about the most. And I think the number one thing that a Series 3 player of my type of player, like I'm not going to say it's the number one thing every Series 3 player cares about, but like a guy who plays to win, a Spike, what they want is one good deck. They want a puncher's chance. They want to be, doesn't have to be the best deck in the game, but they don't want to be sitting there losing to everyone who has everything and they're not able to compete. They want a good deck that they can play. I actually think if they implemented those deck bundles better, it would be a good solution to this. The problem is they're like only on the web shop, which is not something people know about. It's not like an easy to access thing. They're not in the actual game. I don't really know why. Like, I obviously have no understanding of why, but my take is I think that while it is true they need to address Series 3, they have a framework in place that could address it much better, and they're using it in a way that makes it hard to notice. And so I wonder if there's like some sort of financial incentive for them where they're like, well, technically these were available, but nobody actually saw them, right? I don't know. It does make it like a little bit tough for me to judge because I think that bundles would be a really good idea. Like if they could sell pre-cons effectively that were actually pretty good, I think that would be good. And I am sort of like the way they've been implemented has not been wonderful to me, especially because you see like compared to those bundles of like reasonable Series 3 cards on the web shop, you'll get like $50 Ravonna Renslayer and then a bunch of credits. And it's like, it's technically a good deal, but do you really want $50 next to the price tag of one card? Is that good for your game? And I don't know. I personally think that there is vast room to improve in terms of selling those pre-cons, honestly. Getting God splits on cards now means less because the rates are so high. They used to be something to cherish, but now it's almost a formality given the percent increase. I don't think they were ever something to cherish. That's just my take, but sometimes on Hot Takes, we just got to talk about what I think. And by sometimes, I mean all the times. That's pretty much the conceit of the series. That said, God splits never meant anything. They never meant anything. They were something the community entirely made up. They're not in the game. It's literally just a word for when you get the rarest kind of split with the rarest kind of crackle. That's it. That's the only thing people have ever meant by it. It's not real. It's all fake. It is a social construct. All of this is a social construct. They're not real. They never meant anything. All they ever meant was that you spent more money than the other person you were playing against. I never even notice opponents' splits. It's never something that really comes up. It doesn't matter. These are all things that do not matter to me. In terms of God splits becoming less meaningful, like, I don't know how that could ever not happen over time, right? The only way that doesn't happen is if you are purposefully inflationary with the number of possible splits there are. Of course, God splits become less meaningful over time. There's been 2 years for people to roll on them. That's how it works. And talking about it in the context only of the boosted rates is like, what are we doing here? It would have happened anyway. Just the boosted rates sped up the time period. Now it's 2 years instead of 2.5 years before they start losing meaning. I don't think they ever had meaning in the first place. They have whatever meaning you aesthetically choose for them to have. And that, like fundamentally, I'm not going to say like these are art, right? They're like on some level procedurally generated, but like the appreciation people have for them shouldn't, and I'm serious about this, be about their rarity. It should be about how much they like them. I have a Thanos that I could apply a God split to, but I don't think my God split version of that Thanos is better than the one where it's inked with just a little bit of white tone flair. I think that one looks better, even though it's more common. And I just sort of feel Like, people have gotten hung up on, I have the bestest, most specialist version of this card, rather than being like, what do I actually think looks good here? Shadow King is underplayed, not because people don't know he's good, it's because he's the only tech card without an animation. I hadn't thought about this, but it might be true. They specifically cited Shadow King being like a little bit underplayed everywhere outside of the top level when they did this buff. And maybe they could actually fix that by giving him an animation. This is a call to action for everyone at Second Dinner. Hashtag give Shadow King an animation. Storm was nerfed more because the bots couldn't handle a Storm War Machine Legion deck and would give up 8 cubes to it consistently, more than it was actually annoying players. I think this is a really bad take because there are billions of decks that instantly farm the bots. That's not really a difficult thing. And because I think there is no way Second Dinner is incompetent enough to balance around bots. I strongly suspect that when they refer to low rank gameplay, they are taking out the bots because they have the ability to do that. Just because the public trackers do not have the ability to remove bots does not mean that the people running the game can't tell when there's a bot. Like, I strongly suspect that they are not including bot games when they're talking about a card underperforming in ranks outside of Infinite. Because if they were, I think I would lose all respect for them, and I just don't think that's a realistic world. I don't understand why Activate had such a weird launch. We get 2 existing cards and 3 new cards with it, and then the following month has none at all. And then the next month might only have 1. Activate as a card mechanic, I think, is a fine mechanic, but I personally think that if I were on the design team, what I would do is release Activate, figure out what's right and wrong with it, and then come back to it. And I think that means that you have to give it a little bit of time before they come back to Activate. Because, like, I'm assuming that they intended Activate to, like, hit high, right? They were like, let's push power into Activate. And what we learned from Activate was that it's actually a lot worse to have an Activate card than it is to have an on reveal or an ongoing with relatively the same effect, right? And that is because these Activate cards have a turn of delay where all the other ones don't. And so a lot of Activate cards hit lower, I think, than I would have expected them to, and probably than they expected them to. And based on my understanding of their development pipeline, in order to implement that knowledge, that's going to be a little bit of time. There's going to be some 3 to 6 months in lag time. Like, I don't know when they finished up testing on these cards, right? The Spider Activate season. I don't know when that happened, but it probably wasn't right before they came out, you know? What they're working on right now is probably something 3 to 6 months in the future. And that means that in order to incorporate those lessons properly, it'd have to be something they started working on now. I'm sure we'll see some Activates, but I do think that, like, the right thing to do with a mechanic like that is understand what you did right, understand what you did wrong, do a little bit of a post-mortem, and then figure out what you're supposed to do with that mechanic going forward. What were the lessons learned? How much stronger does an Activate need to be than a comparable on reveal? What did we learn from that? How does that change based on an Activate being cheaper, with the best Activate pretty clearly being the 1-drop one and the worst ones being the 4-drop ones? What do we learn? And I think that that is probably a good long-term stewardship way to think about the game. I think a worse game would have just pumped out Activates immediately, and they would have all landed low, and then people would have had no idea what's going on. I think it is probably good that they are trying to, like, understand this, assuming that my read on this is correct. I don't know that that's why they're doing it. They could just be like, oh, we did the Activate month, we're never doing it again. But my instinct is that when you have a mechanic like this, you want to exercise good stewardship of the game, learn from the first implementation of your mechanic. And I'm saying this a lot based on, like, Magic the Gathering, right? Like, they'll introduce a mechanic for a set, and then they'll think about it and figure out what went right and what went wrong and what they can tweak and what they can change. Morph in Onslaught became Manifest, you know, in Tarkir, right? There are things you can take and learn and grow and understand what needs to change in order to make things make more sense. And I think that if you're taking a long-term view of the game, that's what you should be doing. If you're taking a short-term, this game is going to die in a year cash grab view of the game, that's when you start pumping them out right now. Dracula should be nerfed with his interaction with Apocalypse, but apparently for everyone, Dracula is fine. Yeah, Dracula is fine. For some reason, Twitter is really yelling about this one recently. Like, Dracula shouldn't give Apocalypse the additional 4 power from discarding it on the Dracula. I don't see why. That would be an effective balance change, right? Like, it's not like that interaction, unless people are saying that interaction is overpowered, which it's not. I don't really see the point of nerfing it. Like, people talk about, like, oh, well, it doesn't make sense. Would it make any more sense than the card not counting the fact that Dracula says discard on it? Would that make more sense? That for some reason this card that scales when you discard doesn't actually count when Dracula does it at the end of the game? I think they did it the right way, personally. But more importantly, discard isn't a good enough deck to deserve a nerf, and I don't know why we're talking about it like it is. While some critiques around the split rate controversy are valid, such as more transparency around drop rates for the various loot boxes in the game, it has been difficult to rally around the whales demanding more from Second Dinner because their asks and outrage have been so ridiculous. God, I'm going to be real with you. I agree with this. I feel like, again, we talked a little bit earlier talking about a similar subject when I said the easiest way to make me disagree with you is to make a bad argument. And I don't even necessarily mean a bad argument so much as like this overwrought gamer rage TM kind of thing that I see in a lot of gamer spaces. It gets very exhausting over a longer period of time. And the example I'm going to use about this is 2 separate tweets from Lauren, who was the person who brought to light that there was an issue with splits and should be commended for that. But 6 months before she brought to light that there was an issue with splits, she brought to light that there was a separate issue with splits. We were getting more than we expected. There were more good things happening to the player base than there were, than we were able to expect. In other words, what she pointed out was that there was a 25% chance to get ink or gold rather than the stated 10% chance. That tweet got 38 likes. It got 38 likes. 38 people responded to good news about the game by liking that tweet. The tweet pointing out that some of that bonus had been taken away, thousands of likes, weeks of discourse. And that specific dynamic is very frustrating to me. The dynamic by which there is an inbuilt group of people who are much more willing to believe and care about and boost and talk about a bad thing about the game rather than a good thing about the game. And I am, as a content creator, averse to that. I feel like across much of my life, what I don't want to do is be cable news. What I don't want to do, despite the name of this series, is be Stephen A. Smith. I don't want to be that. I want to talk about things clearly and as intellectually honestly as I am capable of doing. And that's not perfect, but I will try. And when I see posts talking about this issue, which as far as we are aware, was caused by a bug that they were unaware of, I just sort of feel like when they talk about it in these vastly overwrought, like, this is evil and scummy and criminal, I almost feel like the words that should be applied to this are not being applied to this. Is it bad? Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty bad situation. Should they post the rates? Yeah, I probably think they should. Should they put more care into that? Probably, yeah. I do think that, like, the fact that they were unable to notice this over an extended period of time speaks to, like, some level of disconnect from the game that's probably bad. Are they evil? No. Are they criminal? I don't really think so. I'm pretty sure they have, like, a legal department that is very expressly measuring this kind of stuff, right? I think they probably have a better idea of whether they're breaking the law than we do on the internet. And I guess it just sort of feels like there's this level of, like, willingness to jump to not like a 10 on the vitriol scale, that's reserved for, like, Twitter politics, but like an 8, right? Like, people jump to like an 8 very quickly. And it's like, I don't really understand why we can't be at a 4 more often. I don't really understand why everything is up here and we can't just be, like, down here a little bit. Because I feel personally, and this bothers me a little bit, I feel like my opinion on this has been shaped by how much I hate the way people are talking about it. Like the fact that the people who I think, if I really dive down into it, I think the people who are complaining are probably morally in the right here, but they're so annoying about it that sometimes I hear it and I'm just like, can you just stop? And I don't really know, like, if this is, if we're assuming the argument here is to, like, the point of it is to drive action among the wider player base and get people like me to care about it. I might be an outlier here, but I feel like the easiest way to do that for me is not with emotionally charged language, is it's with a good argument. And I just, it feels like most of what I see is emotionally charged language as a substitute for a good argument. And that's frustrating because I'm pretty sure there is a good argument there, but very few people seem interested in making it rather than yelling. And this is just a me as a human being. I'm gonna feel a certain type of way. I'm gonna be like, can you, like, the fact that that is how this is being approached makes me feel like your position almost must by necessity lack validity. Even if that's not true, that's how it makes me feel. And I have to then do work, active work, to get past my initial distaste at how this is being approached. And that's really frustrating to me. That I have to, like, actively, like, I get it. It's like, it's a human thing. You got to work to overcome your limitations. And it definitely is a limitation of mine. But it does sort of really stand out how much of the discussion has been like, this is bad and evil and I will quit. How dare you? And how little of the discussion has been like, I recognize that it's not just splits people are paying for, it's also credits. I recognize that progression is a part of this. This isn't really a black and white issue. There is a little bit of nuance here, but I still do think that Second Dinner acted inappropriately in this way. And I'm glad that they compensated in the way that they did, but I personally believe that maybe they could do more, and here are some suggestions. Like, it doesn't really feel like we get that. It doesn't really feel like we get any, like, actual assessments of the situation. What we get is, you messed up. How dare you? Your compensation doesn't even deserve to be called compensate. And it's just like, I don't know. My eyes glaze over. That's my honest feeling about all of this, is that it makes, like, the way people are making the argument makes me feel like there's a barrier I have to jump over. Like, I have to be like, all right, I will ignore all the bad arguments here to try to get down to the meat of what you're actually saying. And I hate that there's that barrier in my way. All right, y'all, thank you so much. I've been KM Best. You've been phenomenal. I will see you in the next one.